Israel's parliament, the Knesset building in Jerusalem. An imposing edifice, it's very popular with tourists, and the guides really need to be multilingual.
On the left of Moses, a little boy with a hand. Left and right.
There's plenty of history and symbols, but what happens here has a very real impact on events all over the Middle East. So it's of more than national importance when Israelis go to the polls to elect a new parliament. And that's what they're about to do. For a nation of only 3.5 million people, Israel's got a staggering array of political parties. There are 22 contesting this election, ranging from ultra-right-wing to the communists. Those in between include a women's group, a citizens' rights movement, and several factions of the so-called Black Panthers representing non-European Jews. It's the job of the Central Election Committee here in Jerusalem to sort them all out. Israel's system of proportional representation means a candidate doesn't have to fight an individual constituency. He simply gets put on the party list. Parliamentary seats are allocated in proportion to the party's share of the vote. So the nearer a candidate is to the top of the list, the better his chances of getting elected. All the candidates will be fighting it out against the background of a very different kind of battle. Posters giving warning of terrorist bombs are a standard part of the government's election literature. The main spotlight has, of course, fallen on the ruling coalition known as the Labour Alignment. After a change of leadership last month, its hastily printed election posters bear the image of Shimon Peres, the former defense minister who's now acting premier. Labour has governed Israel ever since the state was founded 30 years ago. Israel's first premier, David Ben-Gurion, still dominates their Jerusalem headquarters. At the last election, Labour won control of 51 out of 120 seats in the Knesset. But this time it could be different. According to recent public opinion polls, Labour's share could drop as low as 40 seats. The party's never really recovered from the effects of the 1973 war, but its current troubles began in earnest last December. American F-15 Eagles. When the first consignment of these advanced warplanes arrived in Israel on December 10th, Premier Yitzhak Rabin claimed they would give the nation fresh confidence in its ability to defend itself. But for Rabin himself, the planes meant trouble. It was claimed the arrival ceremony had encroached onto the Sabbath, the Jewish day of rest, and in the Knesset, a group of Orthodox believers passed a vote of no confidence in the government. It got the backing of the National Religious Party, part of the government's coalition. Rabin hit back by expelling the rebellious ministers from his cabinet. As a result, the government lost its overall majority and had to resign. Rabin survived as a caretaker premier. But a few weeks later, he faced another challenge. The challenge came at Labour's annual convention in February, where the choice of party leader was thrown open for the first time to all 3,000 delegates. Rabin had long had his critics who accused him of weak leadership, and there was a strong movement in support of Peres. It was a hair's-breadth decision, and though Rabin won by only 41 votes, he insisted all was well with Labour.
I believe that the Labour Party is united. There were different opinions who should lead the party, but I don't believe that there is any question about the unity of the party.
It's doubtful whether all Labour members would agree to that unity. On the vital question of territory, for example, former Defence Chief Moshe Dayan strongly opposed the conference's decision to commit itself to giving up parts of the West Bank in return for a peace treaty with Jordan. His attempt to block the proposal only just failed. Apart from divisions on politics, Labour's been hurt by scandal. Last October, Asher Yadlin, a former union official, was charged with siphoning union funds into Labour Party coffers. His conviction did little to help the party's image, or that of Mr. Rabin, who nominated him for governor of the Bank of Israel. A few weeks later came another shock when Israel's housing minister, Avraham Ofer, committed suicide after coming under investigation in connection with another union money fraud. The state funeral, including an oration by the Prime Minister, did something to restore the dead man's reputation. Nothing incriminating had been found and the case was closed. But for the party, there was worse to come. Mrs. Rabin came centre stage after revelations that she'd broken Israel's currency laws. She'd maintained the family's bank accounts in Washington long after her husband had left his job as Israeli ambassador to the United States. Israelis are allowed to hold foreign currency only when actually working abroad. Matters weren't helped when the Rabins first claimed the accounts contained only small sums, then eventually admitted it was several thousand Israeli pounds. Mr. Rabin, protected by parliamentary immunity, paid a token sum out of court, but his wife was given a massive fine. It would have been a severe embarrassment for any politician, but for a premier approaching national elections, it was clearly impossible. Rabin bowed out of office, though not necessarily out of national politics. Rabin's downfall handed victory to Shimon Peres, especially after his only rival, Foreign Minister Yigal Allon, was persuaded to stand down. The party's Central Committee gave the new man an overwhelming vote of approval. Despite the enthusiasm, Peres has long been mistrusted by Labour's left-wingers, as well as by some of the party's old guard. Up to now, he's impressed people more as a defender of Zionist ideals than of socialist ones. But he made one thing very clear.
But what I want basically to say is, in spite of the personal changes that took part in the major party of this country, there won't be any substantial change in the policies of Israel. Namely, we shall continue to strive for meaningful negotiations with our Arab neighboring countries in order to achieve a real, complete peace in the Middle East.
On relations with the Arabs, Peres has earned a reputation as a hawk, opposed to handing back territory and in favor of more Israeli settlements in the occupied areas. But he now rejects the hawk-dove terminology and insists that the important decisions are ruled by circumstances, not by prejudice. And so far at least, he's convinced the Labour left that he'll stick to the party's electoral pledge on territorial concessions. For many Israelis, Peres has more to offer than his predecessor. He's ambitious, astute, and has a commanding presence. With 35 years of political experience behind him, including considerable success at the Defense Ministry, he's expected to provide firmer leadership than Israel's had in recent years. But it's not absolutely certain that he'll get the chance. In downtown Tel Aviv, a banner from the kibbutz movement tells the parties to stop moaning about the state of Israel. But the truth is that for many Israelis, there's quite a lot to moan about. Israel's economy has been in difficulties for some years, and especially since the 1973 war. Since then, military spending has rocketed, and the effects have been felt by everyone. Last year, prices rose by nearly 40%, and the most optimistic forecast for this year is at 25% inflation. Personal taxation is among the highest in the world. Even average wage earners can pay up to 60% of their income in taxes. For the motorist, it's a nightmare. Import duties triple the price of even an ordinary car, and fuel taxes make Israel's petrol among the most expensive on earth. The astonishing thing is that despite these difficulties, Israel's roads are crammed with traffic. But even those Israelis who do live well are worried by the economic outlook. And those who believe that it's all the fault of a weak government and powerful trade unions are pinning their faith more and more on the main opposition alliance known as Likud. Likud was formed nearly 4 years ago out of several right-wing political parties. It's the group with the strongest following among the armed forces, and traditionally stood for the retention of all lands taken in 1967. At the last elections, it won 39 seats, coming second only to the Labour alignment. At the moment, the alliance is led by veteran politician Menachem Begin, a prominent leader of Israel's guerrilla movement in the struggle for independence. Begin's now 63 and recently suffered a mild heart attack. He's recently moderated the alliance's hawkish stand on territory in Golan and Sinai in the hope of gaining more votes from the center.
Should be made. This is the law of a parliamentary regime.
This is one territory Begin is not prepared to hand back, the West Bank. Likud wants to annex the whole of it, creating an Israel stretching from the Mediterranean to the River Jordan. This recent incident in Nablus was just one example of what the Arab population thinks of such ideas. But there are some Israelis who are more implacable on the issue than Likud. These are members of Gush Emunim, an ultra-right-wing religious movement which makes a pilgrimage into the West Bank every year as part of its crusade for a greater Israel. For some, their enthusiasm borders on fanaticism, but their numbers are growing. They're not contesting this election, but they are throwing their weight behind the National Religious Party. As its name implies, the NRP's main concern is upholding religious principles within the world of politics. As such, it's neither left-wing nor right-wing, though it's formed a part of the Labour coalition in Parliament for several years now. The 10 seats it gained at the last election were vital to Labour's ability to stay in power, and it's difficult to see how Labour will be able to do without it this time. But the NRP's clash with Labour over the F-15s is seen as only one sign that the pattern of Israeli politics is now beginning to change. So are new alignments perhaps in the offing?
Dr. Berg,
NRP leader Dr. Yosef Burg.
I'm not so sure. There's no question that everyone wants a change, but not everyone knows how to make it. But I believe there will be certain changes, but not in the way of a revolution.
In this Before the resignation of Mr. Rabin, you did fall out with the Labour alignment. Would you go back into a coalition with the Labour government?
The question is not only how many votes we will get, but how many votes the other parties will vote. We are open-minded. All the options are open. We don't owe anything to any party. We can go with the left, we can go with the right. Personally, I would advocate in our party that we should strive for a cabinet of national unity on the broadest parliamentarian basis that could be imagined. And I believe we have so many challenges before us in the field of economy and in the field of diplomacy that we need a very strong government.
If you do emerge in this powerful position you expect to come out in, would you press for a national unity government?
Absolutely.
The really big change in this election is the emergence of a new party, the Democratic Movement for Change. It was formed only last December, but it's made astonishingly rapid progress. One opinion poll estimated it could get from 10 to 15 seats, which means that it would effectively hold the balance between the major parties and thus be an essential partner in any coalition. The parties scored particularly heavily with Israel's disgruntled middle classes. Many see it as a natural ally of Labour, a coalition replacement for the National Religious Party. But the party itself claims it could just as easily team up with Likud. The voice on the tape is that of party leader Yigal Yadin, a former chief of staff and one of Israel's foremost archaeologists who transcribed the Dead Sea Scrolls. He's been out of politics for 20 years, so what made him start again now?
And what really brought me back now is the deep concern towards the internal problems of the country, both the social and economic, which I basically believe that they are in a mess, in a certain mess, because as a result of the democratic system. In other words, we haven't got any system of constituencies, which means that nobody knows who is electing, and there is no possibility to form a stable government. And we really want to change the way of life. We want to revive, let's put it this way, the Zionist vision, which means that after all what we are trying to do is to create not just another state, but a better state, a good state, where Jews can be, again, proud people and people of quality. This is the main reason.
The government's answer has been to deny that there's any real alternative to the old firm, which, despite its problems, is the only one with the experience and ability needed to run the country. Men like Labour's number 3, for example, former Foreign Minister Abba Eban. He is currently under a cloud after allegations that he too kept an irregular account abroad. But he sees only danger in tampering with the system.
Is what shall be the central bulk of our governmental reality in the future. Now here the Israeli electorate is very incalculable, and it's very illogical in its totality. Every 4 years, the Israeli electorate says to the Labour movement, we want you to accept responsibility for our fortunes, but we're going to give you a little less power with which to carry out that responsibility.
Just how Israeli voters will share that power out will be seen on election day. But the various scandals, coupled with the worsening problems of the economy, have led to public disillusionment with politicians and what they can achieve. But the electorate is in a mood for change. And if the major parties keep their promises, then change there'll be. They've all declared the system of proportional representation must go, to be replaced by some form of constituency system. For however much Israelis differ on matters of policy, they're all agreed that what the country needs now is an effective parliament under firm leadership.